Today, we're going to get a preview of the second annual Gospel from the Garage concert. It's happening this Saturday, November 22nd at 4 p.m. It's benefiting local food pantries. This is happening at the United Methodist in Barryville Church on Route 97, right by the river. And I have in the studio with me Barryville musician and writer Mike Edison, who's behind the project, blending century-old spirituals, folk blues, protest songs, and his own originals with a full-on rock and roll energy. He has toured with legends like Sonic Youth and the Ramones, and literally wrote the book on Charlie Watts. And today he brought his guitar. So, Mike Edison, welcome to the program.
All right, I'm really, really glad to be here, and I'm really excited to be doing the Gospel from the Garage show 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
And I'm a nice Jewish boy, and I didn't burst into flames the first year, so I'm putting this down in the win column, and I'm ready to have another go at it. Let's save some souls.
So let's start before we get to the music. Let's start off how this started. This idea started. How to want to connect with the United Methodist Church, and and benefits the food pantry.
Well, first of all, okay, the benefit of the food pantry now more than ever. I think it's time to take care of our community and help people who are the most neediest. And I've learned over the years, one thing is when I moved to a small town, I had a huge shift in my worldview. And that's how much impact you can have on a small level. When you live in a big city, everything seems to be on the macro. I'm playing nightclubs. I'm trying to reach as many people as possible. But living in a small town and also being a music teacher, teaching at Bethel Woods, you realize, you can hit people, make a greater difference, one-on-one, 2x2, 4x4, same way they walked onto the ark, 2x2.
Yeah.
You can make a real impact that way. And the best thing you could do for yourself is to do something nice for somebody else. That's the other thing
Yeah.
I've really learned. So that's definitely part of this. That's why we do it for charity. And coming to the church, well, I just always wanted to sing in a church. All my favorite singers, my favorite rock and roll, Little Richard, James Brown, Ray Charles, Aretha, they all started in church. Rock and roll comes from the church. And I'm working at the farmers market on Saturdays, and I'm looking at this beautiful church by the Riverside, and it's very dreamy. It's very idyllic and idealist at the same time. And I talked to Pastor Dave, who became a friend of mine from hanging out at the farmer's market, who's a great guy, is a very progressive guy. And I said, hey, Dave, I want to sing in your church. I want to do this thing I call Gospel from the Garage. And he said, right on. We were friends. And I said, we'll do it for charity. I'm going to come. We're going to shake it up. Going to rock and roll a little bit. And he was very, very nice and welcoming, as was everyone at the church. And it was a great success last year. Last year, there was this crazy ice storm. The power was out in Barryville, in the town of Highland, for like 6 or 7 days. The power didn't go on until like 20 minutes before the show. And we were like, what are we doing? What are we doing? We're going to do this. How do we get in touch with people? How do we let them know? He said, we're doing it by candlelight if we have to. Show's going to go on. We're going to go on unplugged. We're going to do this thing. And the lights came on. It was a Christmas miracle or something like it.
It was divine intervention.
It was a November miracle. But we did it, and the church was packed, and we had a great time. And now it's institutionalized. So here we go, volume 2.
Yeah. So you're doing a mix of a traditional gospel music, I guess, or is it?
Yeah. So I really spirituals. The difference between a spiritual and a gospel would be that gospel music is usually written down, for piano music. It usually appears in sheet music and often involves a choir. Spirituals are kind of music that came through more of an oral tradition, more of a troubadour tradition. And these are songs you might have heard on the street, and like Reverend Gary Davis or Blind Willie Johnson, some of these guys where I got a lot of stuff from. One of my other heroes is Odetta, the folk singer. Yeah. Who, like Bob Dylan, who's also, it's impossible to ignore his influence, but me and Bob have both boosted a lot from Odetta and the Staple Singers, right. One of my all-time favorites. So that's where I was getting this stuff. And, there's just that point in my rock and roll upbringing, and I came up in a garage, not in a church, where you make this connection, you just keep going farther and farther back in the lineage, and you realize this is where it's coming from, and you get deeper into it. And I remember being on the road with my punk rock band, and we'd always stop at these truck stops and buy these gospel cassettes, in the rack, best of gospel, something or other. And every single one of those cassettes had stuff that we were just like, it just spun our heads around. It was like being hit by lightning. We're like, this is where it's at. Yeah. This is the real rock and roll. This is really how you shake up the squares.
Yeah, like I said, you mentioned like also a lot of famous artists who had their start in the church, singing in the church, and that's what a lot of times back in the day, that's what people heard, live music.
Yeah, and long time ago, still the 21st century, but we were working on a gospel project. It was like a rock and roll band playing gospel, and we were getting into it. And we were looking for a guy to play organ, to play B3 Hammond organ. And we put out an ad. Probably Craigslist was probably the the tip of the spear back in the day. And this guy who played organ up at a Baptist church in Harlem responded, say, "Hey, I'd love to do this. Come on up and come up to the service and check it out." And we went up to this church on 135th Street. Uh, and it was amazing. It was like everything. I mean, they were rocking. People brought their own tambourines.
Mm.
It wasn't, I love that. People had these tambourines that were, they had been handed to them by they'd gone down generations, taking tambourines out of like velvet bags, and the place was shaking.
Wow.
It was shaking. It left a real impression on me. And that guy ended up playing with us for a while until his wife said, like, "Yeah, no more of that. No more going downtown to hang out with the white boys. You got a kid, you got a job.
Yeah.
Your
responsibilities. You
get over it." But he taught us an awful lot, and going to that church, we learned an awful lot.
Yeah. I had to say, when you said that, bring the tambourines, I had it's not a church experience, but I had my daughter at the YMCA, and she had like a music class. And so, they hang out the tambourines to the kids, the shakers, and it gave it to the parents. And I have to say, I had fantastic time playing with the kids and all communal, making music together. It just actually felt good.
Well, tambourine is like the most important thing.
Yeah.
I think over at Bethel Woods, everybody that comes through my class knows how I feel about the tambourine. It's so important. It lifts everything up. And a pretty famous jazz guy said to me one time, he goes, "Yeah, you put your best guy on tambourine. That's not like, that's not a demotion. You put your best guy on the tambourine because everyone in the room can hear it." And it's so true. If someone's not shaking it or swinging it, they'll take the whole song down.
Yeah.
Tambourine is so important, and I'm putting it out there to everyone. If you're listening to the radio and the Beatles or the Stones or whatever it is, there's so much tambourine and maracas.
Mhm.
And Bo Diddley is kind of my spirit animal, so I put maracas on everything. But it's not easy to play, and it's really so important to the whole gestalt, if I can say gestalt.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say that on the radio?
I don't know what that is.
The whole, the meta of rock and roll is so, it's defined by a tambourine. You can't make a Motown record without one.
Right. Yeah.
But it's right out of the church.
And it cuts right to the mix sometimes.
Oh my God, it's so upfront. The tambourine. You really got to be confident to play a tambourine and shake it. So I love teaching tambourine. I teach drums and occasionally guitar and bass, and we do all sorts of stuff.
Let's talk about a little bit, but before we get to your music, you mentioned that you teach. So you teach at Bethel Woods.
Yeah, I do. I'm a teaching artist at Bethel Woods. Right now, we're wrapping up an adult program in the evening, and it's kind of classic rock oriented. That kind of seems to, how it is. People seem to like the music they liked when they were 16.
Yeah.
I'm trying to knock down that wall, but that's kind of where it is. And we teach kids too, and we have the Rock Camp Ambassadors, and hopefully you're going to be playing our Christmas song pretty soon on the radio when we finish it up, which are teenagers who kind of aged out of the Bethel Woods Rock Camp, the summer program, kind of boot camp for kids to play rock music, and it's extremely rewarding. And being a teacher is that thing. I didn't have great teachers when I grew up, and I didn't have a lot of people encouraging me. And now I realize that it makes you touching just one person or two people or three people. You have a class of 20 people. If you can reach 4 or 5 people, they'll take it. You change lives that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. Music is such an enriching thing. I play guitar, and when I come home from a stressful day, and I sit down with my acoustic guitar and just play a couple of songs, it just changes the mood.
Of course. And that's one thing I try to teach is even if you're not playing, you're not trying to make it, whatever that even means anymore. A life in music connects you to the rest of the world. You're part of something much bigger than yourself. And it's a way to open up your heart. And I also believe in rock and roll. There is salvation. I do. I think I'm incorruptibly optimistic that way. I really think that singing and dancing save souls. It really opens up, whatever weird chakra that starts with your heart and goes out to your fingertips and, up and, through your, through everything, breathing and singing and moving. I mean, that's everything, right?
Yeah.
So I really think it's a very powerful thing. And I encourage everyone to play music, even if you're not going to get on stage, even if it's just going to be the talent show or the open mic, or to really plug it in and get loud and rock and roll. It's life-changing.
Yeah, well, definitely. So you want to play one of the songs that you're going to hear on this Saturday?
Yeah, why not? We got a long set on Saturday, and I'm bringing my electric guitar to the church. I'm really excited about that and the tradition. When I was a kid, I bought this record by this cat, Reverend Lewis Overstreet. This is back in the time when I used to buy records based on the cover, because I go looking at the bins, and it was this guy who was a preacher in the South in Alabama, I think, Reverend Lewis Overstreet. He had a Stratocaster. It was in the 1950s.
Right.
He was playing a Stratocaster in church, and I'm like, whoa! And I just bought that record and brought it home, and he was just just really rocking it out. And that was like made a huge influence on me. So another reason why I just want to play in church is because I want to be like Reverend Lewis Overstreet. You know,
the acoustics must be nice also.
Oh man, well the room's very live.
Right.
Yeah, it's really a live room, but it's crazy, you know, playing there because it's 4 PM. It's you're not playing in a bar. People aren't drinking. It's a concert.
Right.
You know, no one's playing pool. No one's eating cheeseburgers. And it's you know, it's I'm kind of naked up there. I mean, I'm just kind of my guitar to gird my loins, but otherwise I'm pretty exposed.
Right.
So for me as an artist too, it's you know, I'm letting it all hang out. This is it. There's no place to hide.
Right.
So I thought I'd sing. This is one that I picked up in the last couple of years, and I think it's the only song that's covered by both Bob Dylan and Led Zeppelin. And it's usually considered traditional, but I guess if anybody wrote it, maybe Blind Willie Johnson. But there's so many different versions, so many different verses. It's pretty short, and I think I sing one more verse than Bob Dylan did on his first record before he really became a songwriter. But In My Time of Dying. Well, in my time of dying, don't want to wander on. All I want from you, sweet Lord, is to take my body home. And I said, well, if I could die easy now, well, if I could die easy, well, if I could die easy, Jesus, make up my dying bed. Well, in my time of dying, don't want to wonder, cry. All I want from you, sweet Lord, is to take me when I die. And I said, well, if I could die easy now, well, if I could die easy, well, if I could die easy, Jesus gonna make up my dying bed. Well, catch me, Jesus, catch me in the middle of the air. If my wings should fail me now, won't you buy me another pair? And I said, well, if I could die easy now, well, if I could die easy, well, if I could die easy, Jesus gonna make up my dying bed. Well, I'm going down to the river, plant my flag in the sand. Then I'm gonna shout, hallelujah, I made it to the promised land. And I said, well, if I could die easy now, well, if I could die easy, well, if I could die easy now, Jesus gonna make up my dying bed. All right, call that the go-go gospel with the shaking beat. And yeah, I love these. Whatever you thought about gospel, I'm gonna turn it on its head. Because it's rock and roll. This is a rock and roll concert in its way.
It's the I guess the I don't know, the birth of rock and roll. It all came from that.
Of course, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, another one of my heroes. I mean, these are people, the architects of rock and roll. Everybody that came out of the Black church really is, that's it. And I'm fortunate enough that I'm old enough to have seen so many great blues musicians, like in the 80s when I was coming up, you could still go see John Lee Hooker, and James Brown was playing all the time, and white country guys who also had great roots in gospel and church music. And it's really, it's in my heart, even as much as I came up with the Ramones, that's what really touched me, is listening to Hank Williams, sing songs of praise.
Right.
Wow. And especially because I grew up in a, suburban Jewish kind of middle class environment where we basically feared Jesus.
Yeah.
And feared Santa Claus. But, crazy thing is I had an art teacher. One of the few really good teachers I had, the one guy, and there is the guy that touched me and changed my life. And, he said, well, Mike, you should read the Bible. And I kind of looked at him and I said, well, he wasn't proselytizing. Mm-hmm. I was on my way to film school. I went to film school. And he said, if you want to understand the history of art and you want to understand films, you want to really understand what you're watching, when you need to understand the gospel of Christ, because it's just the most dominant story ever told in Western literature. So I started reading it, and I found out I liked some of it. These are great stories. The language was amazing. Everything from Genesis to Revelations. And I love the Old Testament story songs. And I do a lot of that. Go Down Moses and the story of Joshua, story of the flood. You might hear all those.
Yeah.
But all of this kind of left an impression. Then all of a sudden, when you're listening to Bob Dylan or Metallica or Johnny Cash, you're hearing all these Bible references. Everything is kind of coming into clearer focus. And I do believe in salvation. I do believe in forgiveness and kindness and charity and all these things. A little bit better than the angry God in the first book, but
right.
But the songs are good though.
Yeah. I was wondering, you have you've met some of the great people, like the Ramones, toured with the Ramones. Watching the Ramones during their time, were you there saying, "Wow, this is great, like, this is historic," watching it? Or was it just like, "Hey, this is a band, they're hot right now, and this is what they're doing"?
Somewhere in between, maybe. Um, the Ramones always seemed to be hot in my world. The Ramones were always they were there though. They played often, and I don't know that I felt watching them or playing with them that we were making history, but we knew we were part of something bigger than
Right.
ourselves, like I was saying before. And I mentioned to you before we're doing this. I'm working on a new book. I write books, and the last book was about Charlie Watts. It's called
Mhm.
"Sympathy for the Drummer." It's about Charlie Watts of the Rolling Stones, and really is about the birth of rock and roll and how they connect to it. Because certainly, if you were watching the Rolling Stones, they go back. They understood gospel music, and they understood Howlin' Wolf and Muddy
Huge
Waters,
influence
and
of gospel and blues and
they,
yeah.
they literally learned sitting at the feet of Little Richard and Howlin' Wolf, and they got it. And it's that doesn't exist anymore. You can't do that anymore. I don't know who's going to replace that. But I'm working on a new book, and it's called "Someone Counts to Four, and Then You Start Playing,"
Mm.
which is sort of what happens in the rehearsal room. And it's that moment when someone
Yeah.
counts to four, you are in the present moment. The present moment is inevitable, and that's it. You're there. But no one has counted four to more times than the Ramones,
Yeah.
right? Than Dee Dee Ramone,
Yeah.
right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're in. And the Ramones, there was something extremely exciting about that. And you really felt like you're being caught up in this like whirl, this hurricane, this rush. Yeah, you knew it was happening. Um, but like a lot of things, there's no way to predict the future. No one could have predicted like a 79-year-old Bob Dylan still making a great record.
Yeah.
When the Rolling Stones put out Some Girls, they were all in their 30s and they were saying, "Oh, you're over the hill." No one could understand what a 30-year-old guy would be doing playing rock and roll music.
Right.
Uh, so long live the Ramones.
Yeah. Well, I should talk about Charlie Watts because I'm now interested in reading this book because as I learned more about Charlie Watts and how jazz was part of his life and that was his life outside of the Rolling Stones was all jazz, and I was just wondering like how that struggle that I don't know, maybe it's not a struggle, but he goes from personal life jazz and loves playing jazz and then does rock and roll.
Well, that's the Stones. That's the secret is that Charlie Watts was a jazz guy and he knew how to swing within the song and he wasn't stomping all over it. He had some nuance and some subtlety, and especially on these shuffle beats of these
Hmm.
old blues songs that. Unfortunately, a lot of cats I know they want to play and they say, "Well, blues is easy, wrong. Blues is boring, wrong. It's only got a few ingredients, therefore it's simple, wrong." And I always say, "Well, look, pizza's got only 3 ingredients, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of bad pizza in the world, you know." And Charlie got this thing when they were listening to Jimmy Reed, I think specifically, whose shuffle beats are impenetrable. There seems to be an extra breath in there.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys I know they can play, Metallica or Tool or something very complex and can't swing a shuffle to save their lives because they kind of skipped over it because the myth is that it's easy and that everybody does it. But and Charlie was a jazz guy who saw that as jazz music. He saw it as an extension of that. So the syncopation and breathing into the song, not playing it straight on the beat all the
Yeah.
time, getting behind the beat a little bit and knowing when to push and pull with the song. And that's, I think, what makes the Rolling Stones so great that you would know the Rolling Stones. Even if Mick Jagger weren't singing, you could hear the band and say, "Wow, that's Charlie Watts." Very
Yeah.
hard to do as a drummer.
Yeah.
There are only a handful of guys that could do that, where you just say, like, boom, that's them. That's the thing. And he does things that are very counterintuitive, opening up hi-hats in weird places and weird emphasis and weird things that only a jazz drummer would have brought to the fore.
Yeah.
So it's incredible. So when I wrote that book, people always said, "Well, how long did it take you to write that book, Mike? Sympathy for the Drummer?" I was like, "Well, 45 years, because since I started playing the drums when I was a little kid, it was easier to play along with a lot of stuff. Like prog rock was easier
Hmm.
because you could figure it out. It was kind of, you could, connect the dots. But Charlie Watts was he's an autodidact and I said very counterintuitive and swings in a way. It's like poetry.
Yeah.
You could learn to do it like it, but you can't learn to do the thing
Yeah.
exactly, which is why if you go on YouTube, and look up how to play like Charlie Watts. There's like 1 or 2 videos, and it's very something very specific he does in one song. There's no wide ranging thing, but if you look up how to play like Rush, how to play like Neil Peart, or how to play like John Bonham,
Yeah.
who's pound for pound maybe the greatest, but there are hundreds of videos of doing it perfect,
Yeah.
of kids doing it perfectly in their bedroom, and there's nothing on Charlie Watts because you can't do it.
Mm.
It's just it's that thing you can approach but not touch.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always appreciate the people like Charlie Watts who have, are in this big rock bands, but they have a very simple kit.
Right. Well, that's then what more do you
Yeah.
need? And Charlie Watts, I mean, he was a jazz guy, and that's what his whole thing was. And when they brought him in, I don't think he was all that interested in rock and roll. And he came around and you heard it, and it made sense. And they always said like we weren't even sure we could afford him, But when we got him, we started getting more people because he emphasizes the roll, not the rock, and that's the sexy part of the whole thing. In the equation, the roll is much more important than the
Right.
rock. I mean, anybody can rock, teenagers, the skateboards, they rock, but roll, I mean, that's Frank Sinatra, that's Billie Holiday, it's Duke Ellington, it's all the things, but it's also the Ramones in a weird way. They swing and roll, not like swing like, hey, like the, Count Basie band, but there's a sense of, you could dance to it. You could dance to it, and Metallica, not so much. AC/DC swings like crazy.
Well, I always appreciate, like, I kind of grown to appreciate more like Ringo Starr and his style of, because he's one of those drummers that has a signature sound.
Oh my God, Ringo is so great. And when I was a kid, it was always that thing too, especially because those big drum sets seemed to define the era. And like, well, Ringo doesn't do anything that anybody couldn't do, which is crazy because he's such a stylist. He does so many wonderful things and he's so musical. And now I think everybody realizes that in the last 20 years. Maybe it's partly because of the internet. I mean, I don't know that we're living in a golden age of music right now. We're certainly not living in a golden age of rock and roll, but we are living in a golden age of music nerds. There's no question about that. And people have come to really respect Ringo Starr's simplicity and his style and his vibe and his feel. And these guys aren't interchangeable. There's a Leon Russell record that Charlie Watts and Ringo Starr both play on. And it's crazy because they're on the same record. It's just, and you could feel that they feel the same sort of music. Leon Russell's R&B and Oklahoma funk, but they feel it much differently. It's just, it's one of those things. I mean, Keith Moon, if he doesn't find the Who, where's his life going? Because, he's the unicorn. He speeds up. He's uncontrollable. He's not going to fit in the Rolling Stones any more than John Bonham would have fit in the Beatles.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned now because of the internet, and I think the appreciation, because now you have all these channels now who do a deep dive on Keith Moon or other musicians. Because I was listening to an interview about one of the producers that produced the Who, and just talked about how he approached his drumming, and he said, I just set up the mics and let it go, because he was just that personality of a drummer that was so different from everyone else.
I don't know what else you could have done with him. Let him off the leash.
He was just hoping that his bikes wouldn't get hurt. So,
but now everything's on a grid. What they call, and click tracks really do dominate the recording industry. So you find everybody playing in time. Listen, there's not a single Rolling Stones song that ends at the same tempo that it begins. This idea that Charlie Watts was a metronome is not true, because he pushes through the choruses. It's just a little bit. He's not putting on the gas too much. He knows how to push through the guitar solos. Keith kind of pushes them. In that band, you have more, I think in a lot of ways, you have more of a connection between the guitar player and the drummer. And the same with the Who too. Mm-hmm. You have those guys kind of chasing each other around like Tom and Jerry, Pete Townsend and Keith Moon. Whereas a lot of bands, the drummer will sit in the pocket with the bass player. That would be, classic rock and roll. That would be more Ringo's more there. And certainly anybody who played in, Stax Soul or Atlantic Soul or, James Brown's band or anything like that. The Ramones. I mean, it's definitely, everybody's more locked together than the Who and the Stones. There's a little bit of a wild card. One guy's a little bit ahead, one guy's a little bit behind. I mean, it's imperceptible. They're not off the beat. They're just playing at the front of the beat.
Right.
But that gives it some friction, and the friction makes heat.
Yeah.
I mean, they taught you that in science class, right?
Yeah.
Friction makes heat, but that's it in practice.
Right. No, definitely. So you want to play another song?
I would love to.
What song are you gonna play next?
I'm gonna play what's kind of become a theme song for me and my band, the Edison Rocket Train. And I want to thank you again for having me on. And I want to hope to see everybody down at the church this Saturday, right, November 22nd.
November 22nd at 4 p.m. at the United Methodist Church in Barryville, right by the river.
Yeah, right down by the river. And it really is a dream to play in a church by the river. And it's a charity event. We're going to help our local food pantries. We helped out a lot of people last year. And I'm going to come. I'm bringing my electric guitar. I'm going to shake it up a little bit, like maybe like Reverend Louis Overstreet, just a little bit. But I'm going to give it my best and sing a few protest songs. These songs of freedom that we sing have never gone out of style.
Yeah.
You would think that maybe protest songs, maybe were a thing of the past, but now more than ever, I think we all need to raise up our voices and sing together and come together. And this is a community event. Everybody is welcome. And thanks again for having me on. But I gotta go.
It's Mike Edison from Barryville.
I gotta take the train, and I ain't taking the E train. No. and I ain't taking the PATH train or the Metro North. I think I'm going to get on the gospel train. I said, this train is bound for glory, baby, this train. This train is bound for glory, baby, this train. This train is bound for glory. Don't take nothing but the righteous and the holy, baby, this train. This train. Well, this train don't take no gamblers, this train. This train don't take no gamblers, this train. This train don't take no gamblers, no crap shooters, no midnight ramblers. This train, this train. I said this train, it's a clean train. This train, it's a clean train. This train, it's a clean train. Everybody about it knows Jesus' name, Lord. This train, this train. Well, I said, this train is bound for glory, baby. This train is bound for glory. This train is bound for glory. Don't take nothing but the righteous and the holy. This train, this train. All right, I can't wait to see everybody this weekend. This is the Gospel from the Garage show, and thanks for having me once again on Radio Catskill. I love you all. This train, this train, all aboard. This train,
That was Mike Edison from Barryville, playing this weekend, November 22nd at 4 p.m. at the historic Riverside Methodist Church in Barryville on Route 97, right by the river.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.